Fellas, I've been making a lot of mistakes in recent videos. I've been mixing up fighters, I've been mixing up records, so the improvements will be made. But more importantly, the UFC have improvements to be made too. There's so many improvements that could be made in the UFC. Don't get me wrong, UFC is way above companies like Bellator, PFL. I don't even know if Bellator's a thing anymore, but ONE FC. But there are still so many improvements that could be made, and the UFC gets stick very regularly for these sort of stuff. So today, we're going to be going over 5 ways that the UFC could drastically improve. And these aren't even difficult ways. I'm not saying that the UFC need to spend thousands and thousands or millions and millions on these things. These are just simple things that could be added to the UFC to make it improved. Starting off with, let's bring back post-fight press conferences. These had some of the best moments, right? The post-fight press conferences really made for some iconic moments. The Rockhold versus Bisping post-fight press conference was one of the funniest press conferences moments ever. You know, when Bisping just knocked out Rockhold and Rockhold's dissing him on the mic. Bisping walks in with the belt and starts, ripping him to shreds after he's just knocked him out cold. These moments we don't get anymore. Even the Dillashaw versus Cruz, we don't get these moments anymore, and I think these were amazing, man. I think these were absolutely like, imagine Sean Strickland knocks out Adesanya UFC 293 and starts ripping him to shreds in the post-fight interview. It's moments like these that we don't get anymore. I think we need more of these. I don't understand why they removed them, and they're much less time consuming than the current ones. The current ones you have to wait for 30 minutes. Oh, wait, you've waited 30 minutes, great. Now a fighter comes in. Yeah, it was a good fight, you know. I think it was a good fight. I think it was close. He was a good fighter. We don't need that anymore, man. We just need straight fighters. Straight fighters, not gay fight. No, anyway, we need straight fighters. Just go in there, talk about what they've been doing, talk to their opponents, and the robberies can be confronted too. If a fighter's been robbed, they can discuss it. There's no running away, there's no hiding from it, there's no cowering from it. You're forced to discuss it in front of your opponent. I think this is an amazing addition to the UFC. If they added it back, I don't understand why they removed it in the first place, but this was great, man. This is one of my favourite UFC moments. There's so many highlights that could be made. It's essentially just a normal press conference. I think we should add it. Personally, I think we should add it. I don't see why not. Obviously, if it's like a Volkanovski, Brian Ortega situation where their faces are literally melting off, then yeah, maybe not add them to a press conference. But I think for the most part, imagine Adesanya versus Pereira after their first fight where Pereira won. That press conference would be amazing, man. I just think that we need these back. I miss them. I think everyone misses them. I think I speak for everyone when I say that we miss them. So I think bringing this back would add for so much of the best moments in UFC. The rematches could have been made. Like, imagine the Pereira versus Adesanya post-fight press conference. That could have been such a good promotion for the rematch. So I'm going to say that, yeah, we need these back. But we also need fighters to be able to walk out with flags and have a few sponsors. Now, the fighter pay has been a problem in the UFC for a while. Fans, fighters, reporters, and even people like Jake Paul are now giving Dana White stake in the media, on Twitter, on websites, whether it may be. Dana White is getting disrespected for this fighter pay thing. And allowing fighters to use sponsors can earn them some more money on top of getting paid by the UFC, and it kind of shifts the responsibility back onto the fighters rather than onto the UFC. The fighters want money, get a good sponsor. That's simple. Obviously, we don't need OnlyFans sponsors like Derek Chisora, but I think this could be a great addition to the UFC. Allowing fighters well, not an addition, it was a thing. Having sponsors so fighters can get paid. And I don't think that the UFC would be losing too much back. They might lose a deal here or there, but essentially they can just get the fighter deal thing sorted out with if they just allowed sponsors. And I'm sure a lot of the top fighters would get sponsors, and the UFC fighter pay could be increased just like that. And on top of that, I think fighters should be able to walk out with their flags. Let Colby Covington bring out the USA flag. Let Pereira bring out the Brazilian flag. There's no harm in it, realistically. Like, the UFC took it away because of the whole like Russian-Ukraine situation, which kind of died down now. Like, I really think that there'd be no harm in doing it at all, and it never really made sense. Like, it's cool to watch fighters represent their country in their way in the octagon. Like, a fighter winning and then holding up their flag should be allowed. Like, imagine Sean Strickland just KOs Adesanya and then sits on the octagon in front of where is it, Australia, and just raises the USA flag. Or Aspinall just knocks out John Jones and raises the Great British flag. I think we need the flags back. I think we need the flags back, walking out with them in cage. I think they should be in the UFC. I don't know why they've been removed. I just think it's pretty. There's no reason for it to be removed. But moving on, make the interim belt silver or remove it as a whole. Come on, the interim belt should not look identical to the real belt. The real belt is an achievement, right? It's a belt to say that you're the best in the entire division. And the interim belt looking identical kind of just takes away the buzz that the real belt has, you know what I mean? Like, making it silver allows the real belt to be completely unique. And the silver belt kind of has like a best in line or second place effect. And casual MMA fans like Max Holloway are going to be confused when they see that two people in the same weight class have the same belt. And when I became an MMA fan a few years ago, I was confused at the concept of an interim champion. Like, so removing the belt as a whole kind of makes sense too. Like, why are the fighters being rewarded for second place? It just doesn't really make sense for me. Yeah, just doesn't really make sense for me why there's an interim belt in the first place. I don't know why they added it. Like, I get that you're trying to say that this fighter should fight for the belt next, and an interim belt is kind of like a one-way ticket to a title shot, but I don't think we need an entire belt to say that a fighter should be fighting for the belt next. And I know they only do it when a fighter's injured, but why do they not just call it number one contender fights? Like, if Moreno and Kai Kara France, for example, are fighting to determine who fights for the real flyweight belt next, why don't they? Why have they got to create an entire belt? Because the interim belt goes away the second a real title fight happens. We don't need Yair Rodriguez. We don't need all these guys taking pictures with the real belt as if they're the real champion. I think it should be either removed or at least make it silver so it has more of a personality to it. And I'm not even going to get to the BMF belt because that is a disgrace in itself. But yeah, I think make the interim belt silver or just remove it as a whole could help a lot. Next up, let's add an open scoring system. The amount of robberies in the UFC recently have absolutely been barbaric. It would be cool to see like the result, which the fighter or the fighter and the direction of the fight is going. I just said fight about 20 times, but it'd be good to see which direction the fight is going rather than waiting for Bruce Buffer to announce the fight or the result. And I know that Dana White doesn't really like fighters to have rights, but why not let fighters see if they're winning or losing? Like, I think fighters deserve to know. And on top of this, right, fighters that are losing will be able to pick up a pace and potentially the matchup could be made more interesting since they'd be more desperate or maybe even looking for a finish. Like, if it's a 3 round fight and you've lost 2 rounds and you know that, then you're not going to win a decision. So you've got to go in there and you've got to absolutely maul your opponent. And this could make for so many good moments in the UFC. Like, if a fighter knows they're losing, then they're going to increase desperation. They're going to look for a finish. They're going to do some more Francis Ngannou versus Rosenstrike moments. I think this could be an insane way for the fighters to pick up a pace. But on top of that, I think it's a great concept, and I think it should be added to the UFC. It allows us to see which favour the results go in without being left with confusion. I just think this is an insane addition to the UFC. I don't know why they don't do it. We're not reinventing the wheel either. Listen, this has been done in other sports and in other companies. I know there's a few boxing companies that do this, and there's not really any issues with it. I don't see why it's an issue. I don't see why we don't have it. Let's just do it, man. Let's just add an open scoring system for the fighters to see if they're winning or losing. Desperation will be picked up. Only thing that's going to happen is matches will be more fun and fighters are going to be more desperate to win the belt. Imagine Jared Cannonier menacingly running towards Adesanya after knowing that he's down 4 rounds. That'd be insane. We need to see more of this. But the final thing that I say that could improve the UFC is we have more events in different countries, man. Why not? Why don't we have more events? The UFC should make more events in different countries. The UFC audience, first of all, would increase drastically. Like, imagine a few years ago, we had a UFC Africa with Francis Ngannou and Kamaru Usman on the card. Or a UFC China with Israel Adesanya and Zhang Weili. Like, I think the UFC are missing out on a huge audience, and they should try and move events outside of the 5 main, like USA, UK, Brazil. And I'm glad that Australia and Abu Dhabi have been added because they're relatively new. But I think they should just add more events in different countries. Like, even some fight nights in a different country would be cool as well. Like, stacking it with fighters from said country. Like, we don't need any more Francis Ngannou versus Blades. I don't know why they headlined UFC Beijing. That didn't make any sense. Why is an American fighter and an African fighter headlining a fight from Beijing? Doesn't make sense to me, but I think it will give some big opportunities both to the UFC and the countries that the event's being held in. So I'm going to say that adding more events in different countries, like maybe a UFC Japan or a UFC China with Adesanya Zhang Weili, Li Jingliang, maybe add Song Yudong from there as well. I don't know, just stack it with those fighters, get some fight nights in there. There's no issue with doing it. It's only going to increase the, the audience for the UFC. So I think it should be added, and I think it's only going to do positive things for the UFC. But that is 5 ways, in my opinion, that the UFC could drastically improve. Please let me know if you agree with these takes or not, and thank you for listening.